on the Boardwalk kind of hotline. He's the author of the brand new book, Bubbleball, Inside the NBA's Fight to Save a Season. National NBA writer, covered the NBA for a while. You've heard him here before on 97.3 ESPN. He is Ben Golliver, joining us right now on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Ben, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So before we get to the real particulars of the book and any other topics, I just always like to start with when I talk to anybody who's written a book about, what was the thought process that brought you to the point where you were like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write this book, because I think some people overlook the fact that writing a book is a serious commitment, and especially one as exhaustive as your Bubbleball here.
Well, I got to the bubble and I spent my first week in isolation in that hotel room walking back and forth. And I know a lot of people probably saw that video of me just kind of trying to get my Fitbit steps in when we were stuck in that hotel room for a whole week. And, a few of my essays that I wrote about the experience of just getting acclimated down there, they just generated a lot of interest. And, I heard from an agent and a publisher pretty quickly who were interested in saying, hey, this could be a project you could expand into a book. And for me, I realized I kind of got the golden ticket, right? I was one of the very few people who actually got to live inside the bubble all summer long, all playoffs long, and watch these games up close and personal. So as a diehard basketball fan, I thought, hey, this is a great opportunity to write a book that's going to appeal to a lot of basketball fans out there. And at the same time, I wanted to be able to convey the challenges of the experience as well. I mean, look, there was a real big brother element to the surveillance, to our day-to-day lives, to all the rules that were necessary to keep us safe. And I thought, this could be a great time capsule 10, 15, 20 years down the road when people are kind of wondering, well, what was the pandemic really like? How did it impact the NBA? How the heck did LeBron win a title at Disney World? I mean, all these kinds of questions are going to sort of be lasting, right? And so for me, it just made sense to kind of put it all together into this project. But you're right, man, it was a slog. I took 1 week off after the bubble in October, and then I immediately got to work writing. I wanted it to be fresh. I wanted the book to move quickly and to have that same experience that we had in the bubble, which was just nonstop sensory overload. And so I spent about 2 months writing through this, the first copy, and a couple more months editing. And I'm just so excited that it's already out and ready to go before the playoffs.
And one of the things is that, to me, the book is more than just specifically the bubble, Ben. From talking to you last year and also, listening to you on the Open Floor podcast is something that you've talked about, the fact that, there was a lot that went into not just getting this off the ground, but making this work in an environment that really wasn't ideal for anything. It was more than COVID. It was the social injustice movement. It was, everything that happened in the league before we got to this point, from the Hong Kong fiasco to Kobe's death. It felt like this bubble was way more than just about COVID, even though a lot of people historically 15, 20 years from now will hyper-focus on the COVID issue.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of layers to this story, right? I mean, there's a basketball layer, there's a public health layer, there's also a social justice layer, a political layer because of the presidential election that was going on last summer. And of course, there's the business layer. Let's not forget that. I mean, the NBA had to spend basically $200 million to construct and maintain the bubble to keep everybody safe. And ultimately, they were able to generate roughly $1 billion in television revenue to kind of offset some of the losses. And so all those things are wrapped up in this book. And the social justice angle was huge. I mean, that with the Sixers players who were very outspoken, including Tobias Harris, but also LeBron James, Paul George. I mean, a number, Damian Lillard, Jaylen Brown. I mean, the list goes on. Chris Paul as well. I mean, these guys went to the bubble with the purpose to really, have a shared voice and have a unified approach to some of the treatment of Black Americans by police officers, and to also try, in some cases, to swing the results of an election, right? To be able to have their impact felt when it came to that presidential election. And so those layers for sure are touched on in this book extensively, most notably with the Milwaukee Bucks protest, their decision not to take the court after the Jacob Blake shooting, but also the pregame kneeling protests that were done before every single game, and a number of the things the players did, to campaign on behalf of Breonna Taylor's family and George Floyd's family as well.
The book is Bubbleball, Inside the NBA's Fight to Save a Season, released right now. Or if you're like me, you're going to be getting the audio book on Audible. Of course, Ben Golliver joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. national NBA writer for the Washington Post, Open Floor podcast, and more. You can check him out at Ben Golliver on Twitter. Again, the book is Bubbleball. Ben, when I think about the bubble as well, one of the things that I remember very distinctly was how stressful it was for everybody at the beginning. And as time progressed, it seemed like things at least a perception on the outside looking in, it felt like things got a little bit better for everyone in there. Can you touch on a little bit of how stressful the environment was being in there, even though maybe we'll consider it probably the safest place in the world during that time?
Well, absolutely. I was very nervous going down there because there's just been nothing done quite like it here in the country. And there was a real potential for backfire, right? I mean, if players are going to grab, Postmates order, if they're trying to go to strip clubs like Lou Williams or have unauthorized visitors in their room like Daniel House, that puts everybody at risk. And so for sure, I went down there just kind of concerned, like, is there going to be an outbreak? Are we all going to be in trouble? Now, within the first few weeks, it was clear the very strict rules were working. Nobody was testing positive. And, it was hard to live with those rules, but it was a necessary trade-off, actually, giving up a little bit on the privacy side to know that you weren't going to be at risk of getting COVID was absolutely massive. And to me, it was worth it. But it was still a challenge. I would say, though, that being there isolated from the rest of the world was really difficult. As the experience went on, a lot of the players were complaining about some of the mental health effects. And I just want to co-sign all of that. When I was down there, I put on weight. I slept terribly. I felt isolated from my family, 3,000 miles from home. My stress level and anxiety were heightened, definitely more so than normal. And even though I was having such a great time covering all these games, and I didn't even have to have the stress of playing in the games like the players did, I was experiencing a lot of the same things that they were. And I know a lot of other media members were too. It was just that rigorous of an experience, right? And so that comes through in this book. I think there's a tendency for people to say, well, it's a bunch of millionaires who just went down to Disney World for a long vacation. That was not at all what this experience was like. There was a lot of lifestyle adjustments. And, ultimately they're competing at a very high level on the court. And that brings just incredible amounts of stress and pressure. And they didn't really have a lot of ways to channel that, those feelings. And so you saw players meditating before games. You saw coaches doing deep breathing exercises after games. You saw everybody trying to get into, regular workout routines just to kind of make sure they could fill the days and stay balanced. Guys like Eric Spoelstra and Brad Stevens would be walking around the campus, in 95-degree humid conditions just because, they wanted to make sure they could stay balanced. So you add all those things up, and I do think that it was probably harder than it sounds, for sure. And for me, again, it was both rewarding but also incredibly challenging.
Now, Ben, in the aftermath of it, was there something that the league or the players or anybody can take from the bubble ball environment that we can move forward with? Because I feel like we're all learning things about ourselves, about the world we live in, that maybe we didn't face before the whole pandemic hit. So was there maybe a point or two that you looked around and says, if the bubble didn't happen, we wouldn't have this moving forward?
Well, I think there are some practical takeaways. Like, for example, the television ratings, when they had to compete with football and, changing up the entire calendar, they went down, like in the NBA Finals, right? When they're going against NFL and college football and Major League Baseball playoffs. And there had been some proposals like, hey, should the NBA try to start on Christmas every year? And I think when you see that ratings compared to when you have the finals in June, that was a takeaway for the NBA that said, hey, look, our normal schedule is not broken. Don't try to fix it. Just try to get back to that as quickly as possible. I think another thing that we learned was that if you don't have travel, you can expect a higher quality level of play. And that's no major surprise. But so many guys got into great grooves in that bubble environment. And I also think that there was a realization, though, that the crowd really makes the sport, especially in basketball. And not only basketball, soccer and football as well. But because the fans can get so close to the action and they can really kind of influence it with cheering and booing and so forth, having those empty arenas in the bubble, it actually was just kind of a reminder of what wasn't there. And that was the kind of the sixth man, the people who really create, the home court advantage. I remember the Sixers over and over during the playoffs saying, man, I wish we were back in Philly because they had such an incredible home record. And yet, they're stuck in Orlando playing in these empty gyms. And so I think really it was an anomaly experience that reminded us a lot about what we should try not to take for granted. And that would be the schedule and the crowds and just kind of the environment that we're used to. And I think that there's also this countdown, right, of like eventually all of us were going to get back to normal, and we're on our way. The vaccines are way up. COVID is down. The situation seems like we've turned the corner and the worst of it is behind us, thankfully. Knock on wood, that continues. And I think that we're starting to look forward to like post-pandemic. And I think there's a real desire by the NBA's decision makers, by players, by coaches, executives, everybody to sort of, put the league back together to where it was, back in 2019 when everything was seeming great and we had no idea COVID was coming.
Again, the book is Bubbleball, Inside the NBA's Fight to Save His Season. Ben Golliver joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline. You can get this book at Amazon or wherever books are sold. Of course, it just came out this week. The audio book is coming out in about, I believe, a week and a half or whenever Audible decides to alert me to it. I already pre-ordered it myself. Ben, I want to ask you a couple questions, if you don't mind, about the NBA as of right now as well, because you've always been very insightful. And you were one of the few people who was brutally honest from my experience about the 76ers last year and about how you're like, listen, man, this is not going to go well for them in this bubble. And you were 100% right. And so I want to know, a year later, what is your perception of the 76ers now? New head coach, new environment, new situation, new challenges in the Eastern Conference.
Well, I'd say they've definitely rebounded from the bubble in a very nice fashion, right? I mean, you've seen Embiid take his game to new levels of consistency, production, efficiency. I love to see that. I do see some of the same lingering questions, though. Tobias Harris is going to have to step up in a way he never has before once he gets to the playoffs. And until he does that, I want him to kind of prove it, and I'm going to be skeptical. Similar deal with Ben Simmons, although we know he's going to make a big-time impact on the defensive end, and they were really missing that in that series against Boston. Look, that series would have gone different if Ben Simmons was healthy. I'm not saying Philly would have won, but it wouldn't have been so humbling and embarrassing. At the same time, you look at the coaching change, it was the right move to execute that, and I think that has really ushered in better chemistry and cohesion and effort level from the Sixers this year, and I think that's translated to their place and their standing right now. One of my hobby horses right now is actually with All-NBA. Now, it's been discussed that, you can actually list Jokic and Embiid at either forward or center when you're filling out your ballot. And some people might say, well, they're both centers, so you should only take one onto your ballot. To me, in this kind of a situation, if the NBA will let you vote Embiid as a forward, you should vote him onto the first team if you're an All-NBA voter. He's been one of the 5 best players this season in terms of his overall production. He's had one of the 5 best seasons despite that injury. And I think it would be appropriate to award both him and Jokic with first-team All-NBA selections. Now, Jokic is my MVP pick, but I do think that that's the right way to handle that if you're a voter. I know it gets a little bit confusing, but to me, having Embiid on a second team where he's in a situation where he might even finish second on MVP voting, that would just feel weird. So I really do hope people reward him with first-team votes.
Also, that All-NBA is important to the players because a lot of those guys have those clauses built into their contracts.
Correct. Well, look, Embiid's making money either way, right? He's doing fine, but that's why the voters need to take these things seriously. Your point is exactly right. I mean, really dive in and try to reward the people who are the most deserving because there's a lot at stake here. In Embiid's case, he's going to be making more money than you and I could ever count in the rest of our lives, and he's going to have another big contract coming down the road here, I'm sure. But to me, this is less about the financial implications for him and more about the reputation. Hey, I was critical of the Sixers last year, but if they turn it around and they prove that they deserve some credit, you better be right there to give them the credit. And I think that's kind of where that conversation starts with Embiid on that All-NBA first team.
Do you put how much validity, I should say, do you put into this idea that whoever gets the number 1 seed is going to have the clear path to the conference finals? I feel like a lot of people in Philadelphia, for example, right in our area, Ben, they're saying, hey, the magic number is 4. They get 4 more wins. They lock up the 1 seed. They are rolling to that conference finals. How much value do you put on that 1 seed in the Eastern Conference?
A lot. Look, it's going to be a big-time advantage for whichever team gets it because that means you only have to play one of the other 2 teams. Look, I look at seeds 4 through 10 in the East, and I just shrug my shoulders and say whatever. Look, Miami might be a little bit of a landmine. Boston might be a little bit of a landmine, but this is a 3-team conference. And so if you can get to the conference finals without having to face either Milwaukee or Brooklyn, that's a huge advantage. Now, I still favor Brooklyn if they're fully healthy. I think they just present more matchup problems for everybody else. given their star power and given how well Harden played before his injury. But Philly's right in the mix for sure, and they're going to have a chance to reach these finals. There's no doubt. I actually think Milwaukee matches up pretty well with Philly. I know they've played some games recently, but Philly wasn't at full strength. Hard to take too much away from that, but the Bucks are looking rock solid. And I think if you're Philly, you just want to sit back and say, all right, let those two teams duke it out for 7 games, and we'll take whoever's left standing, right? And I think, Philly's setting up for a pretty nice second-round matchup, depending on how that 4-5 seed shakes out. I mean, I think that they'd be cruising. So they should absolutely be gunning for that top spot. And, I think from Brooklyn's standpoint, they probably would have claimed it, but injuries intervened, and, that could wind up, cutting into some of their advantage from a talent standpoint.
That's the final thing I wanted to ask you about, Ben. That is, and maybe I'm a skeptic. Maybe I'm looking at it with tinted colored glasses. But to me, I feel like this Nets team, this isn't their year. I feel like the injuries, the fact that both Durant and Harden have had hamstring problems, which can come up as a lingering issue at any time. The fact that Kyrie randomly finds times and moments and places to say, I need some personal time off. I just feel like this Nets situation is just not their year. And I'm just not as afraid of them because I feel like at any moment, Durant or Harden or Kyrie are just not going to be there.
Well, let me put it to you this way. You should ride that for the next 2 months because guess what? They're going to be the most hated team in this playoffs. There's no question about it. Everyone is going to be rooting for them to lose because of how they put this team together, because of the fact that they're the new kids on the block, because of how Harden carried himself before the season. They're going to be the villain. So I think for you, if I'm giving you some consulting as a radio host, I would say be the anti-Nets guy because it's going to be a popular take. Even if you're proven wrong, everyone's going to love you, so roll with it. But I totally hear your point, man. They've only had the top 3 guys together for 7 or 8 games. They look great, but that's not very much cohesion. We're seeing a similar story play out here in Los Angeles with the Lakers, where they haven't been able to really get their chemistry and continuity either. I think Brooklyn's going to roll through the first round no matter who they get. It's that second round you've got to circle. Look, if Harden can't get healthy and stay healthy, that's going to be a tough matchup against the Milwaukee Bucks. If he is healthy, that kind of flips everything because Milwaukee's got a little bit of hole at that 2 spot, right? I mean, you look at Dante DiVincenzo, Pat Connaughton. I mean, those guys are really overmatched if Brooklyn has all 3 of its stars healthy. So to me, that's kind of what's going to decide that series. Harden's the X factor. If he's out there, I'm taking Brooklyn.
He is Ben Golliver, national NBA writer for the Washington Post. The Open Floor is the podcast. The new book, Bubbleball, Inside the NBA's Fight to Save a Season, on sale now, Amazon and wherever else books are sold. Also coming out in audiobook for those of us who have 45-minute drives to work to listen to. And as all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Ben, I really appreciate you jumping on again. I'm looking forward to the book, and I'm sure that this is going to be one of those books that, as you mentioned on the pod, is probably going to be used for like a 30 for 30 in the near future.
Well, I hope so. It's a time capsule book. And by the way, I read the audio book, so I hope you're not sick of my voice because those commutes, you're going to be hearing me in your ears, all right?
Listen, I had somebody, this is a couple years ago, and I will not divulge the book, but it was not read by the author, and the professional reader was so horrible, I had trouble getting through it because he couldn't pronounce anybody's names right. As long as you say somebody's name right, I'm good. I can't stand the dude who can't say somebody's name right, and you're a professional reader.
Well, look, hopefully I nailed them, right? I've been talking to these NBA guys, James Harden, Kevin Durant, LeBron James. I think I'm 3 for 3 there, so we're on the right track, all right?
Yeah, you are on the right track. I feel much more comfortable with you pronouncing Giannis's name right than random Joe Schmo who's a professional reader, okay?
Totally. I hear you, man. It's a pet peeve of mine as well, so I hope you enjoy it. Let me know how it goes, man. I'd love to hear from you once you get a chance to get through it.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it, Ben. Have a good one.
All right, man. Take care.
Ben Golliver, at Ben Golliver on Twitter. Again, the book is Bubbleball, Inside the NBA's Fight to Save a Season. Anybody who knows me knows this was a topic that I was obsessed with through the entire last 14 months was protocols, bubbles, how did this stuff work? I wanted to know everything, so I'm going to be eating this book alive when it comes out. I'm looking forward to this book a lot.